Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Griffin, better known as the Fanatical Futurist. I'm the CEO and founder of the 311 Institute, Exponential University, the World Futures Forum, and in my background, I ran global business units for companies like IBM, Atos, Dell, EMC, and so on and so forth. So, in this particular masterclass, we're going to be going through something that vexes pretty much every single person on the planet. How do you make better decisions? Now, that's whether or not you're an individual, that's it, in an individual capacity, or whether that's in a professional capacity for the companies that you actually work for. Now, when we have a look at the future around us, frankly, everything is getting more complex, everything is getting quite nuts, speed is accelerating, that's it. So we increasingly live in what many are referring to as the VUCA-MAX world. Now, VUCA is a phrase that the United States military coined in the 1970s, obviously stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which was their way to describe the world that they were heading into in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth. However, recently we've been adding the MAX acronym to the back of this term. So MAX stands for a lot of the changes that we're now seeing are massive. They are system level. Think about geopolitics. Think about the global impact of technology that we've seen just recently on everything from stock markets all the way through to investments and so on and so forth. However, the changes are accelerating. Increasingly, I can show you how you can disrupt the entire world in a single day because I can have an idea. I can build a product using artificial intelligence today, right here, in a couple of hours, as we have with rocket engines from companies like Hyperganic and Leap 71 in Dubai. And if I can execute properly, I can have those products, those concepts, and all those ideas and beliefs in front of 4 billion connected people by the end of the day. And then, of course, exponential. Increasingly, the technology around us is exponential. Just look at the rapid rate of development of artificial intelligence. The AIs that I might talk about today could be very different to the AIs that I talk about literally tomorrow. So the pace of change is accelerating, the pace of disruption is accelerating. We are operating in an increasingly fragmented and ambiguous operating environment. And if you're a decision maker for a business, that's a problem. If you're an individual, that's a problem. And I'm going to dig into all of that in this particular masterclass. So let's get on with it. Now, when we actually have a look at the agenda for this masterclass, I've broken it into really sort of just these sections here, so 5 sections. So we've got the introduction. I'm going to go through a couple of statistics and a couple of global observations with you on this one. We're going to look at the 2 decision types. We're going to have a look at decision traps. So decision traps are what I refer to as the things that trip us up, the things that get us stuck when it comes to making a decision in the first place. I'm going to be helping you make better, smarter decisions, and we're going to be stepping through how we do that. And that doesn't really matter what kind of decision you're making, whether it's a small tactical decision or a large strategic decision. So we'll come on to that. And then just a takeaway and a set of roundouts. Now, the word decision itself dates back to Roman times, actually dates back to about 500 BC. And decision is actually Latin for the word to cut. Now, when you think about it, this actually makes quite a lot of sense because ultimately when we're trying to make a decision, we're trying to decide on one thing and we're trying to cut away the rest. All of the other things that we don't care about, the things that we don't want to prioritize, etc., etc. So that's an interesting observation straight off the bat, cutting straight to the heart of what it is to make a decision. Now, I argue basically that a good decision maker is someone who can analyze the available options. Now, I say available options because if options aren't available to you for whatever reason, then just discount them. Take them off the decision-making table, as we say. You need to be able to identify potential consequences. Now, this is actually quite difficult. I'll show you a couple of ways to do this later on in this particular presentation. But trying to understand the consequences of the decisions that we're making is hard even when it's a small decision, let alone when it's a large strategic decision such as what should our company's 5-year strategy should be? Should we move into this market? Should we allocate $500 billion worth of capital to this artificial intelligence project, for example? And then, as individuals and professionals, ultimately, I would hope that you are trying to make decisions and choices that align with your core goals and values. Because if they aren't, then you know that little devil on your shoulder, once you've made a decision and it just doesn't feel ethically right, morally right, for whatever it happens to be, it nags at you and it diminishes you. So these are the core tenets that I think make someone a good decision maker. Now, when I was putting this masterclass together, I did some research into Google Trends. Now, if you actually look, and I found this is sort of relatively surprising, but also not. So when we actually look at the number of people who are increasingly turning to Google to try to help them make a decision on something, the number of people over a 20-year period has increased sixfold. Now, this shows global statistics. However, what I've found is if you look at this from a country by country basis, it's still this graph. Which means that around the world, more of us are having a harder time making decisions in the first place. Now, I think this is, in some respect, due to a couple of things. I think, firstly, we have a lot more options today. Secondly, we're living in a relatively ambiguous and, shall we say, data fragmented marketplace. You know, we're trying to, for example, decide who to vote for is harder than ever before because we have deep fakes and misinformation and disinformation coming into the social networks. So we don't know whether or not we can trust the information that we're actually seeing. But in addition to that, everything is moving faster. And from a business perspective, if you are making the wrong decision as a business leader, then the consequences of that are multiple times greater than they would have been 10 to 20 years ago. So a relatively straightforward example of this is you want to build a new product to move into a new market. Most business leaders, I argue, only see 30% of the future. And I've got some stats, which I'll come to in a moment on that. So you move into a brand new market, and it seemed like a sensible thing to do. But now we see tariffs coming in. We see supply chain crunches coming in. We see China banning the export of rare earth metals, which mucks up our supply chains or logistics or the products that we're trying to build or whatever it happens to be. So increasingly, from a company perspective, business leaders only control 45% of what their companies actually do. The people they hire, the markets they move into, the products they develop, and so on and so forth. 55% of what happens to companies comes from external forces. Someone else did something somewhere and that's had an impact on your company. An external trend to your company, for example, ESG and sustainability, has been passed by policymakers and so on and so forth. That has an impact on your company and you need to deal with that. Someone invades the Suez Canal and you've got to deal with that. Someone tries to take over the Panama Canal and now you're trying to figure out, what are your future shipping routes look like? What are your lead times going to be doing? Et cetera, et cetera. So when we have a look at the environment that us humans are trying to operate in, when we are trying to gather information together to solve problems and come to decisions, it's harder than ever before. So over the past 10 to 20 years, we've seen $50 trillion worth of company value destroyed by new disruptions and technology developments. We've seen a 30% decrease in the average CEO tenure over the past 5 years alone because CEOs especially are finding it more difficult to actually make the right decisions. And then in addition to that, when we have a look from the 1960s to the modern day, the average longevity of companies in the S&P 500 has fallen by 70%. It's no coincidence that we see this confluence of factors coming together. And then ultimately, we are asking you as individuals and or as business leaders to make a decision to move the dial on something in an imperfect data environment where the future is uncertain and where the risks of failure are greater, but also where the risks and rewards are greater as well. So every day, as individuals, in our individual life and our professional life, we are making over 35,000 decisions. About 5% of those have some form of cognitive input. So for example, how many sugars should I have in my coffee this morning? Etc., etc. Should I walk to the fax? Should I walk to the fax machine? Should I walk to the printer to pick up my report now, or should I do it later? Should I walk by Darren's desk or Shirley's desk? Etc. So the fact of the matter is we're making a huge number of decisions every single day. Most of them are tiny. Most of them happen kind of on autopilot. But when we have a look at recent studies, so for example, Barclays in the UK, they did a survey recently and they found that people spend on average about 2.5 hours every day making decisions, 148 minutes. Now, when we actually have a look at daily decisions, women are actually much better and much faster at making daily decisions than men. So women are typically 10% faster at making daily decisions than men. However, as we, dare I say, all see, when it comes to special occasions, men make decisions on special occasions 92% faster than women. So from my own personal experience, when you have a look at weddings, it's well, what wedding colours should we use? Orange. That's it. Whereas the ladies, actually deliberate and think about these things because they're important. But when you actually have a look at the differences between individuals and how we're making decisions and the amount of time that we're spending on a daily basis making some form of decisions, it's crazy. Now, there are two decision types, and I think you'll be able to equate with both of these. Now, first we have intuition. So these are decisions that we intuitively make. So these happen instinctively without any conscious reasoning. I liken it to running down a mountain, for example. If you're a fell runner in North Wales, for example, on Snowdonia, then when you're running down the peak, you are intuitively deciding where your feet go. You're not consciously deciding that your foot is going to tread on that rock and then that rock and that rock. You're making decisions at speed, You can call it gut feel, but it's instinct, let's face it. Now, the other kind of decision-making mode is deliberation. Now, just ask any politician and they love deliberation. Let's think about things. Let's debate and discuss things. Let's go for a bit of lunch. Come back, discuss it more. So deliberation is the careful evaluation and discussion of a problem in order to reach a solution and come to a decision. Now, an example of this is, in the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to be trying to put people on Mars. This is not a problem that you can solve using rapid fire, gut instinct, and intuition. This is deliberate, purposeful decision making, trying to understand what the risks are, minimize the risks, and then make the right decisions for the right environment at the right time. That's going to be difficult for this particular mission. Now, from a household perspective, on average, when we split individual decision making with sort of corporate decision making, on average, the average individual allegedly makes 60 big decisions when deciding on where to buy a house. Let's face it, these. It'll be, should we take all of our furniture with us? How much are we going to spend? How much debt are we willing to rack up on the mortgage? What location should we choose? What are the schools like in that particular area? Are we going to have kids in the new house? Should we have pets? Etc., etc. So there are 60 big decisions that we make as individuals when we're trying to move house. Which solicitor should we use? Etc., etc. Now, For company leaders who are trying to develop new company visions and strategies, the average company strategy is made up of over 500 big decisions. But below that, it's generally made up of over 11,000 smaller decisions. So if you're not able to decide quickly, accurately, fairly, then just imagine the sheer amount of time that you will waste and the amount of bureaucracy that you'll have to go through when trying to make some of these smaller decisions that collectively have an impact on the bigger decisions that you then use to try to move the dial on the prosperity of your future company. Now, when we have a look at decision traps, so decision traps, as I mentioned, basically are the things that fatigue us, slow us down, irk us, and so on and so forth. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take you through what the decision traps are, and I'm going to give you, I'm going to say coping mechanisms. I sound like a psychologist. I'm going to give you coping mechanisms to manage basically these decision traps and get yourselves out of them, if I can say the word traps correctly. So the first one, oh blimey, come on, that's it. We all have decision fatigue, right? So I'm a CEO, I run multiple companies, I have decision fatigue all day. I could sit at my desk with a cup of tea and not make a single decision and just fob it off. That would be nice. There are occasions where I just think I'd love to stare at a wall for a day just doing nothing. But the fact of the matter is I can't. Now, this is how we avoid decision fatigue. Now, the first one is automate routine decisions. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of these. So when we talk about automating routine decisions, in the morning, you probably like to have a drink. You have a choice of oat milk, soy milk, orange juice, apple juice, tomato juice, tea, black tea, green tea, orange tea, ginseng tea, God knows what there. So many different coffee types, it's insane. So in order to avoid decision fatigue, just automate routine decisions. So for example, when you're coming down in the morning, it's coffee, straight away. Don't even bother thinking about the rest. And try to apply this in your professional life as well. There will be certain things basically that happen, when Darren wants you to produce a report for him, you just say, no, go away. So automate routine decisions. Secondly, limit your options. Now, if we just have a look at the morning beverage example that I used, I probably listed, 10 to 15 different kinds of drinks that we could actually have. Limit your options. You're having orange juice or tea. That's it. It's a smaller decision space. This is difficult to do because ultimately when we're trying to make some decisions, what we want to try to do is open up the decision-making space so that we can see all of the different options, evaluate them, bring them back together and end up with a better decision. But there are occasions where we actually need to limit the number of options that we actually have for our own sanity, really. Thirdly, prioritize important decisions. We all know this. It's like today, I'm absolutely certain that there are probably 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 different things that you need to be deciding. You've written down your to-do list and everything else, and you're trying to decide which to-dos do you do first, for example. Prioritize the important decisions. Get those out of the way. Those are the ones that suck up your time, your energy, and frankly will bug you until you've actually decided or come to a decision on whatever those important decisions are. Do you want to move house? It's yes or it's a no, it's not a maybe. For example, get that done. And then, fourthly, use frameworks where possible. Now, I know that there are a lot of experts that will throw frameworks for everything at you. Frameworks for innovation, frameworks for leadership, frameworks for, being a better person, deciding better, whatever it happens to be. We've got frameworks up the wazoo when it comes to us humans. Frameworks for being a better project manager, developing a better supply chain, God knows what. I'm going to show you a couple of frameworks, and I think they're useful, but realistically, let's face it, once you've watched this video and you've gone away, I highly doubt you're really going to use many frameworks that are actually out there. So I'm going to give you some simple pointers that you can follow. Think about leaning into technology, come into that on the next slide, and then try to use tools that are available to you wisely. Now, when we actually have a look at leaning into technology, we can use artificial intelligence to augment our decision-making capabilities and augment our decisions for us. Increasingly, as humans, we are outsourcing decision-making to the machines completely. So I've done a lot of keynotes basically on the end of choice, where the AI, for example, we've got these e-commerce recommendation engines, and the idea, we used to, as individuals, have to look for the things that we wanted to buy. If I wanted to buy a shirt, I'd have to go to a shop, or I'd have to look online and I'd go through everything. We moved from me physically looking for shirts to algorithms recommending shirts. And they say, Matt, we've got all this data on you. Here are 5 shirts, pick one. So limiting my options. And ultimately, as we start outsourcing more of our trust and decision making to the machines, ultimately, at what point do the machines simply say, here's a shirt for you? A very simple example, basically, of outsourcing decision-making to the machines is things like Google Maps. I'm here, I want to get to there. Google Map decides the route for me. So while the use of increasingly sophisticated and intelligent technologies actually benefit us in a variety of different ways, on the one hand, when it comes to decision-making, AIs hallucinate a lot. Very, very badly. I mean, realistically, forget trying to get decent statistics out of most of the latest advanced large language models. And then in addition to that, these AIs have no skin in the game. So AIs are good at helping you, should we say, explore a problem space and showing you some ways that you can come to a better decision because they are general machines. But when it comes to outsourcing your decision-making to machines, a recent survey that I'll put onto the blog that I found recently from a number of universities over in the United States, including MIT, MIT did an experiment with 319 software developers. And what they found throughout this experiment was that the more that people used artificial intelligence for help to augment their work, as well as for decision making, the worse those individuals' critical thinking got. Now, anyone that follows me on the future of work, jobs, education, and skills knows that one of the most important soft skills that we need as humans in the future is the ability to do critical thinking. So while it's all very well using some of the latest technologies and tools to assist you in exploring a problem space and developing decisions, do not outsource everything. Do not outsource your brain to AI. That is critical. Otherwise, from a company perspective, I might as well just replace you with an artificial intelligence, and then you're redundant, okay? You're useless to me, basically, as a boss. Now, decision paralysis. We're going to get on to a little bit of a lighter topic here, I feel. So how do we deal with decision paralysis? Now, there are 3 main causes of indecision. Now, these are emotion. You don't like the unpalatable consequences. Now, an example of this is, as a business, we need to put up prices because our input costs have increased. And we need to decide on the new price, but we don't want to put our prices up because we don't want to increase, shall we say, the commercial burden on our customers. Plus, we're actually a little bit worried about the impact that putting our prices up is actually going to have on our market share. Reframe the problem, okay? So reframe the problem from it being a negative problem to solve to a positive problem to solve. So for example, putting your prices up because your input prices have increased enables you to continue servicing your customers in the way that you want to and providing them with the service levels and the products that you want to, which is good for your customers. So it can sometimes be very difficult to reframe a negative problem into a positive problem, but you'll find that reframing does help. Second, we all see this. The decision space is just too big. For example, if I'm moving house, a great example here is, should I move countries? So, for example, should I move from London to the UAE? There are so many different factors to consider that you end up in that it's not a yes, it's not a no, it's a maybe, and you just get stuck in decision paralysis. So when we actually talk about decisions, making decision spaces smaller, cut the problem down into little pieces and then try to solve each individual piece, put them back together again, and then create your decision. And I'm going to be telling you how to create your decision later on. So we start putting all this together in a bit. And then time, it can wait. Simple example, the diet will wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, the diet will wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, the diet will wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow comes, etc. Now, when we are trying to push a decision down the road for whatever reason, one of the best ways to counteract that habit is to try to project ourselves into the future and then assess in action. So for example, if I'm pushing my diet down the road, then depending on how far I'm projecting into the future, whether it's a day, a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years, and so on and so forth, that could actually have a serious impact on the decision that I ultimately do make. Because if I project into the future in 10 years' time, and I say, well, I didn't start my diet 10 years ago, so this is why I now have had a heart attack. Looking at that problem from the perspective of your future self really changes your perspective. And then you might say, well, okay, I will start my diet tomorrow, and you actually do. Okay, so when we talk about trying to kick hard problems down the road, like should I pivot my company into this new market, project yourself into the future and then assess in action. So from a company perspective, because I took too long to pivot my company into a new market, the new market opportunity vanished and our old market became stale and our profits and revenues started to decline, and now we're laying people off. Okay? So you can work these sort of tips from an individual and from a professional perspective, whether you're a CEO of a company or whether you are not. And then gain clarity. So when we talk about gaining clarity on a particular problem, sometimes you're just too close to the problem, on the one hand, to see it, understand it, and empathize with it. So step back from the problem. Secondly, get perspective. So sometimes the problem that we're trying to deal with isn't the problem that we're trying to deal with. So look at the problem with fresh eyes, gain a new perspective. And then realign. And this isn't just about realigning the problem with your goals and values. This is about kind of realigning your core. When you're having a look at the problem in front of you, get your head straight. That's what we mean here by realign. And then mind the gaps. As a futurist, I track over 600 emerging technologies, 350 megatrends. I track them up to 50, even 100 years out. And when we have a look, for example, at the future, there are quite literally an infinite number of futures. So ultimately, when we're trying to make decisions, quite a lot of our decisions actually affect our futures. Should I start my pension plan now? Should I invest in crypto? Whatever it happens to be. So when we're trying to make these decisions at a personal and or professional level, the fact of the matter is, on the one hand, we're living in an ambiguous world where all of a sudden something on the other side of the planet has just had a massive impact on my business. So an example of this is China releases DeepSeek. DeepSeek tanks the United States stock market and pension funds by $1.3 trillion. However, on the back of that, it actually pushed up the Hong Kong Stock Exchange by $1.3 trillion to make a $2.6 trillion delta. So we live in an ambiguous world. We don't know everything that's going on. We can't predict everything that's going on. That's it, but something over there just knocked my business for 6, or whatever it happens to be. But then we also live in a world of imperfect information. Now, on the one hand, we've always lived in a world full of imperfect information. But increasingly, as artificial intelligence creates new synthetic content, as we see deepfakes on the rise, as we see both misinformation and disinformation being pumped into our social networks, but also into our search engines and our company databases by state-sponsored actors. So I've done a couple of keynotes basically on the future of trust and truth and misinformation and disinformation, which I'll tag in the comments below. Increasingly, we have a problem. We kind of come together to gather information, and then we use that information to make a decision. But if the information that we are taking in and analysing and ingesting is imperfect, whether that is by accident or intentionally, chances are the decision that we make is going to be, should we say, wrong, and or not the best decision that we could have made. So the way that we try to solve this, and this applies especially really to business leaders, is, as well as, for example, country elections, is work hard to find the fundamental truths. Don't rely on assumptions. Don't rely on things that you can't validate. Once you've done that, focus on the few key facts that will drive most of the results. And you should be able to identify these easily because you've got the problem. You know the problem space, and you hopefully understand what goals you're trying to achieve. And so really these key facts and the results they drive should align with the decision goals that you're looking to achieve. Okay. Like driving profit, for example. And then make low risk decisions that are easy to reverse. So, for example, if you are developing a company strategy and you've made the decision that you are going to pivot the entire company into Indonesia, and that happens to be based on imperfect information, that's a high-risk decision that is not easy to reverse, for example. So you can either make lots of low-risk decisions and then incorporate those into your business, but you do need to make sure that they are easy to reverse. And it's okay to reverse a decision. A lot of people feel ashamed basically when they say, yes, I made this decision, it turns out that it's the wrong decision, so now I'm having to reverse it. Being able to reverse your own decisions is a brave thing to do. And people who are willing to reverse decisions should be celebrated, not kicked to the curb. Now, would you like to decide better and smarter? It's possible to do both. So, this is the last half of the presentation now, and let's get into how you decide better and how you decide smarter. I've got to listen to this section myself because I'm really rubbish at decision making. That's what I decided anyway. Now, there are kind of two sort of, shall we say, problem spaces. Now, the first is problem solving. Now, when we think about making decisions, we've got tactical problem solving. So we have an immediate problem today and it needs solving today. You know the ones, they're generally sort of quite small, short and sharp, decide. That's That sort of space is where we often use intuition, but you can actually start deliberating as well. But you know, these short, sharp, tactical decisions, we face them every single day, every hour, let's face it, probably every couple of minutes. Now, the other one basically is strategic decision making. Now, strategic decision making is making decisions, it's making decisions, but it's deciding the best strategy for the long term. As someone recently said to me, you know, these can be very high risk, they can be very high reward, but trying to make strategic decisions in today's information compromised environment and so on and so forth is more difficult than it has ever been, and it is only really going to get harder, you know, especially as we see some of the political and technological and maybe sort of societal trends actually coming through and just confuzzling the hell out of us all. Now, when we have a look at these, the first things you should do when trying to make any decision is you should always create space to think. This is sort of one of my problems. You know, I need to make a decision on something. I will find the space to think, and then I will get distracted. I will get bugged. I will have pets barking at me. You know, something will happen. I had a right day of it the other day, basically, where someone actually, I was trying to make a quite an important decision, and someone then tried to burgle the office. So, you know, I mean, get space to think. Now, getting space to think is kind of a result of you managing your time well. So, for example, if you need to be making a decision today, then set aside 15 minutes, 30 minutes in the canteen if you work at, say, Google HQ and you've got your ping pong table in the lovely canteen outside. Manage your time and go and do it. Just go, it's time, I'm off. I'm going to go and think by myself. Get into the right headspace. Thirdly, get diverse perspectives. So when we have a look at problems, sometimes it's nice to actually ask other people and collaborate and say to people, you know, this is what I think the problem is, but what do you think? You know, what are your opinions? How would you solve this? You know, can you give me some ideas? You know, bounce off each other. And then take time to reflect. I've already said that. So these are the 4 most important things to helping you make better, smarter decisions. And then next, define the real problem. You'll be amazed at how many people do not define the real problem. So I'm going to give you some examples. Now, with a lot of the companies that I work with, so I work with the vast majority of the Fortune 50, I work with some of the most, I was going to say disturbed, but I work with some of the most disrupted companies on the planet. So companies basically like Huawei, Nokia, who is literally a case study in disruption. And sometimes, you know, with the companies I work with, the biggest mistakes that these large companies make, and I'm not saying that Nokia and Huawei are making mistakes, in fact, they do some things brilliantly. Some of the biggest mistakes that companies make happen when you're trying to solve the wrong problem. You know the one. That's it. You've made a decision. You've gone, I've sorted it. It's great. And someone goes, yeah, but it was actually that other thing. And you're like, oh, crap. So a simple example of this, basically within the business environment, is sales are declining. What's the problem? We must fix the sales team. We've all seen this. When I was running business units at IBM and Atos, basically, you know, so if sales were declining or not doing well, or you weren't growing fast enough, you know, what's the problem? It's the salespeople's problem. At IBM was a matrix-heavy organization. One of the big problems we couldn't do there is no one could actually make a decision because no one actually owned the responsibility for making a decision. You had to go through 30 different lines of business to come to any kind of consensus. So what's the real problem here? So our sales are declining. The problem is our sales team. It's not. It could very well be that your competitor has got a much better, cheaper product. So your real problem to solve here is you need to fix your product. And then of course we get into, well, what about the product needs fixing? Then once you've defined the real problem, you need to define the real problem. Yes, I am having a play on words. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. So we're going to use these. Now, some of the companies that I work with basically are, shall we say, strategically important to the countries that they serve and that they operate in. So whether that's the United States, Middle East, and so on and so forth. So one of the problems that we as a large multinational might have is we must strategically align with national priorities. So a very simple example of this is, for example, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, XAI, and so on and so forth, aligning basically with President Donald Trump's strategic national priorities, for example, around artificial intelligence. Okay. That's not the real problem to solve, is it? The real problem to solve, from my seat's perspective, is how can we grow the company, revenues, profits, however we term grow, how can we grow the company and help our country achieve our goals? These two say the same thing, but this one doesn't help you break down the problem space. This one does. So another example. Every company faces this at some point in their future. I face this on a biannual basis because my pricing is fantastic. Now, how do we set the right discount levels to boost sales? Everyone's been asked that question. What's the real problem? How do we balance increasing sales by using discounts or discounting as a strategy without sacrificing our margins or devaluing our product or brand? This, to everybody, seems like the problem. This is the actual, real problem to solve. So let's now go and solve part of that. I'm giving you some examples because hopefully you can work along basically with the examples. Now, when we talk about trying to find the real problem, on the one hand, you need to be able to visualize and empathize with that particular problem. Now, business leaders are horrible at this because business leaders will see, for example, a problem of declining sales, but the vast majority of business leaders are, 3, 4, 5 steps away from that problem, away from the problem coalface. We see that with a lot of the reality TV shows where you end up with the undercover boss walking around and won't actually have appreciated that this person's problem is the reason why the company isn't doing particularly well. So the vast majority of business leaders are far removed from the real problem, which then has an impact when it comes to them signing off on a decision. But also, if you're able to empathize and feel a problem, then you have a different appreciation for it. So for example, I do a lot of work with the United Nations. We talk about solving hunger. Now, one of the best ways to really empathize with the problem of hunger itself is to go hungry, live that life. And then all of a sudden, you actually realize the impact of that problem. And you also start discovering some new issues that are associated with that problem, which give you better insights and more insights, which you can put into your problem space to then start creating a more amicable and appropriate solution to that problem. And then we have the 5 whys. So we were always using this at IBM and EMC. The 5 whys. Our sales are declining. Why? Our sales team can't sell. Why? Because they say that our product sucks. Why? I can't stick 4 fingers up, I don't know why. They say that our product sucks. Why? Users have been telling them that the usability of the product sucks. Why? Because the font and the type that we use for our product is size 2. Fix the font. Okay? So the 5 whys. Why? The vast majority of business leaders and even us as individuals only ever really ask 1 or 2 whys, which is why in a traditional world, I'm spending my time fixing the sales team, not the font size on my product. Okay? So 5 whys is a really useful tool that anybody can use day in, day out in any situation. So now that we've got to the real problem and the real problem, we now need to break it down. So you remember we had those sort of real problem statements? We're going to break them down now. So I'm going to do this using a problem tree. Now, a problem tree is just a fancy way of saying this. So for example, we've got the problem that we're trying to solve is setting the right discount level. Okay, so what we do is, how do we break that down? How do we break that sort of large problem down into smaller individual bite-sized problems that we can pick off one by one? Now, part of the way that we do that is, as you can see from here, let's see if this works. Here we go. So we break the big problem into parts. So one part is optimal discount level, and the other part is the problem that we want to avoid is we want to mitigate negative impacts on our brand equity, for example. Okay, and then, hopefully you get the idea of this. So in order for us to find the optimal discount level, we need to do some cost analysis. That's it. So we need to understand our costs, because we need to understand just how low can we go when it comes to our cost base. So manufacturing, raw materials, supply chains and logistics, that kind of stuff. But then also customer sensitivity. So for example, we know that we could take 50% off of the cost of our products. But do we need to? If we take 10% off, will our customers buy more? They might not. In fact, basically when we start running some different scenarios, we find that they don't. So what happens if we take 15% off? All of a sudden we see an uptick in sales. So how sensitive are our customers to pricing? Not discounts, but to pricing. And then basically we can do margin scenarios. There's a lot of other things we can do as well, but hopefully you get the idea here. Yeah, I get someone to run margin scenarios, as I've just shown you, and then brand impact assessments. So a brand impact assessment, for example, is quite simple. I'll take my own business as an example. I'm selling something for $100,000. I want to increase sales, so I'm going to discount that by 95%. And I come to you saying, hey, I'm now going to sell you a $100,000 product for $5,000. Now, in your head, you're starting to go, is Matt going bust? Is he bonkers? Is he losing the plot? Is he going to have to fire people? Does he need cash flow that desperately? And yet it's got nothing to do with any of those particular, shall we say, outcomes. But this is where, when we're looking at doing brand impact assessments, people's perception matters. So what we've done here is we've broken the problem space of setting the right discount level into lots of little problems. And now what we do is we assign each little problem to individuals or teams, if it warrants it, and we clarify the actions that need to be taken. So here, for example, is one of the, should we say, determining factors on how much of a discount we can actually provide to clients. Basically depends on our fixed cost base. So this is where I need to be very clear with people about what needs to be done. So I need someone to identify the data sources of pricing information. I need someone to identify costs. We need to establish nomenclatures so we're all talking the same language. That's another problem that we see basically within large corporate organizations especially. And then we need to run some pricing scenarios. Okay, so this is this is what needs to be done. So you see, we've broken a big problem into smaller problems, and now we've got small, manageable problem spaces. And the team goes off and does this. and a team goes off and does some of the other bits, and off we go. And then eventually we come together and we collaborate and we join all this stuff up. We need to gather information on the problem, obviously, as well as potential solutions and insights. That information can come from a variety of different places. So again, it depends on the problem we're actually solving. So the data sources that we can use are internal data sources. So for example, customer data, financial and operational company data. Now, going back to my imperfect information environment example, our internal data is probably fairly accurate. Okay, so that's the sort of stuff that we want to trust the most. Not trust blindly, but that's the information we've got more confidence in. We can also go to external sources. So those external sources of information can be academic information, government information, industry information, and so on and so forth. We can go to individual experts or independent experts, and we can say, this is the problem. This is how we're thinking about the problem. What do you think? Is there any other information that you think we should be getting that we haven't got? So an example here basically would be, for example, experts pointing out that you might want to get baseline information for your pricing. So your pricing's up here when actually the industry benchmark and the industry baseline for pricing is down here. So that's an example of just some straightforward information that you can get to assess how competitive you are in the market space. And then diverse sources. Now, a lot of people actually forget these diverse sources. I've got a problem. I need to gather information on that problem, not just on the problem itself, but also potential solutions so I can make my decision. Typically, when I have a problem as a company, I try to look at how other people within my industry solved that problem. What I don't necessarily look at is other industries. How did the other industry solve the problem? A good example is, say, strategy. You see some retailers, for example, in America, their sales are just doing this. But other retailers in America are doing this, but those retailers are actually the tech giants. So, for example, are you a retailer or are you actually a technology company, which is something I quite often talk about, for example, with banks. Banks, every single industry today basically uses a huge amount of technology. So go and seek diverse perspectives and sources of information from other industries. But it's not just other industries. It's from other languages, other cultures, other countries. Because a physical brick and mortar retailer in America might solve the problem of declining sales in an American way. But if you look at Southeast Asia and maybe China, they will likely solve it in a different way. So it can be good to get as much external information from diverse sources as possible. And I'm going to show you why this is actually important in our little experiment here, or our little example. Now hunt solutions. Okay, so you've got your you've defined your problem, you've gathered your information together, you've kind of broken the problem down into little bits. Now let's go and hunt some solutions. There are two key things that I use basically when I'm trying to develop solutions to problems. The first is rapid iteration. Now, rapid iteration is where you get people together in a room, you kind of literally just give them post-it notes, and you ask them all to individually write down solutions to that particular problem. But they aren't allowed to talk or collaborate. Now, the reason for that is Nelson Mandela, a very, very long time ago, so Nelson Mandela is known as one of the world's greatest leaders, but he used this strategy. When asked why he was such a great strategy, he said, "My father was always the last to speak, and I learned that from him." And everyone was like, "Well, what do you mean, last to speak?" If you think about it, take a lot of people, put them into a room, ask them to solve a problem, get the leader to stand up and say, "I think that we should solve this problem in this way." Now ask everyone else how they think the problem should be solved. It'll probably mirror the leader's opinion. So Nelson Mandela was always the last to speak because, for example, in a problem situation, he would say, right, we've got a problem, and he would go round the table asking people's opinions, but those people's opinions were not polluted with his own ideas, his own beliefs, his own opinions. He would only offer that at the end. So by getting people in the room, getting them to write solutions on post-it notes, and by ensuring they don't talk and collaborate, you're taking bias out of the decision-making process, you're speeding it up, and you're eliminating groupthink. Okay, now the next one, the one in blue, is reverse brainstorming. Now, if I say this is the problem, give me a solution, the vast majority of people realistically basically say, I am not good at solutions. Just don't ask me for a solution. You are good, though, at understanding what doesn't work. So, for example, if I said, I want us to grow sales, what should we do? You might not actually have the answer. But this is where reverse brainstorming comes in. So this is where what we do is we create anti-solutions. So an anti-solution would be, well, to grow sales, we shouldn't be nasty to customers. Or we should be nasty to customers, rather. So you take the should be nasty to customers to grow sales, you reverse it. Actually, I'm getting that so backwards now. So you want to grow sales, and if you want to grow sales, you shouldn't be nasty to customers. Actually, do you know what? I've confused myself. I know what I'm on about. That's it. So you want to grow sales, and one of the ways that you are not going to grow sales is by pissing customers off. So that's the anti-solution. The anti-solution is piss customers off. You now reverse that. So in order to grow sales, you want to make customers happy. That's where I'm getting to with this. And so now, how do you make customers happy? So reverse brainstorming, even though my own brain stopped working there for a moment, is about finding anti-solutions to a problem and then reversing those solutions and then digging into those and trying to come up with a solution. Number 7, get alternative perspectives. Now this is important because, for example, in our discount example, what would happen if you didn't have to actually discount your products at all, but could still provide a discount? You confused? You won't be. So this is where seeking alternative perspectives actually becomes important, because, for example, if I wanted to offer my clients a 20% discount, then actually I don't necessarily need to offer them a discount. I could monetize their data, and then I could provide that. Then on the one hand, it's a new revenue stream. Secondly, it's more money into the business. And then I could use that pot of money if I wanted to discount the product, but I'm still not taking a hit on my bottom line and my margins. Secondly, depending on the country I'm in, maybe China, I could go to the government and ask for subsidies. So this is where, for example, the government provides me with subsidies, which then allows me to reduce my prices by 20%, but I've not had to cut directly into my own margins. Thirdly, depending on the kind of company you are, if you're a software company, you could create a marketplace. Then you're taking 30% commission from the third-party marketplace that you've developed. And again, you could use that money, if you chose to artificially discount products without affecting your margins. And then, fourthly, you could actually sell sponsored dashboards. So imagine all of the different companies out there, like Salesforce, for example, that provide some form of dashboard. They could actually say, well, what we will do is we will reduce the cost of your Salesforce subscription by 20%. if you are happy to have sponsored adverts flashing up on your dashboard. And a simple example of this is, for example, Netflix and Amazon Prime. In order to attract new customers, they offered customers a discount, but they offered customers a discount because they developed advertising tiers. And now Amazon says they actually make more money from their advertising tier subscriptions than they do from actual Amazon Video and Amazon Prime itself, which is crazy. So as business leaders and as individuals, when I say to you, we need to figure out what level of discount we need to provide to customers to boost sales, you could just have taken 20% off the top line, and then that's hurting the company margins if we're not doing it intelligently and if we're not reducing our input costs. But using these examples, I've provided customers with a 20% discount, but I've either grown my margins as a business because I've developed new revenue streams, and or I haven't impacted my margins. So look at new perspectives. And then getting to the end now, test and implement. So you've got the problem, you've analyzed it, broken it down, you've solved it, you've come to a decision. Now you need to test your decision. But you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can do it pre and post implementation. So the first thing to do is check for bias. I know a lot of UK insurance companies that have chosen not to move into particular markets. Why? Because the person who was making the ultimate decision was the line of business owner, the king of their particular fiefdom, whose line of business would have been hurt had the entire company moved into new markets. So even though from a company perspective it would have been good to move into, say, for example, in one insurer's case that I was working with, the telematics market, they didn't, because there was an individual decision maker on board who was introducing bias. Another simple example from a procurement perspective is, well, we have decided throughout this process to go and buy off that company. Okay, that's great. Well, we stepped through the problem, we stepped through all the data, and we're going to buy from that company. Well, why is that? Well, that's because my partner works there. When it comes to decisions and when it comes to implementing decisions, as really a CEO and business, specifically C-suite business leaders, you have to do your best to ensure that bias is taken out of the process, because unconscious bias and actual bias creeps in everywhere. We see it with lobbyists, we see it with bureaucracy. The reason not to do something is because of X, Y, and Z. There are a lot of people in a lot of companies who are working contrary to the needs of the company. Run a pilot. So this is where, for example, if we're using our discount example, I run a 20% discount, whether it's sponsored dashboards, for example, to a small subset of customers, and I see how it gets along and I modify it in flight. And if it works, great. If it doesn't work, I kill it and I try something else. We can do a pre-mortem analysis. So this is where, as an individual, I come to you, I say, right, we've come to a decision. Now, as a business, you can use either a couple of individuals or even a dedicated red team and say, okay, this is the decision that we've arrived at. Why wouldn't it work? Destroy it. And a red team will say this decision would not work because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. And then as a business, you need to decide, are some of these risks manageable? Do you care about them? Are they likely to actually pop up? And so on and so forth. So a pre-mortem analysis, especially of bigger, higher risk strategic decisions, is really crucial, actually. If it's lower risk decisions, you might not necessarily need to, depending on what they are. And then seek external perspectives. So you simply say, right, we've come to this decision. As an external independent third party, whether that's individuals, other companies, customers, doesn't matter. These can be any kind of external perspectives. You say, well, do you think it's good? Do you think it'll work? Why do you think it'll fail? Would you use it? Et cetera, et cetera. What do you think? And then these external perspectives could say, well, actually, it's a good decision, but we've seen a couple of other companies implement that kind of decision, and actually it failed because of A, B, C, D. Maybe culture, maybe lack of investment, maybe lack of monitoring, or whatever it happens to be. So there's lots of different things that you can do once you've made a decision and before you implement it, to figure out its likelihood of relevance and success. And then finally, refine and repeat. So you've made your decision, you've gone through your pre-mortem analysis, you've run a proof of concept, doing okay, you've monitored it. What do you need to tweak? What do you need to improve? What do you need to take out? So when we talk about taking things out, ex-novation is one of the biggest, hottest trends of this year. And this is where, for example, you've come to a decision, you've implemented it, fantastic. Ex-novation is about trying to then take out all of the useless things that are adding no value to that particular decision or company process. And so now you're starting to operate lean. And operating lean is very, very important because you need to be able to decide and implement decisions at speed. So agile is a very overused word, but when we think about the speed of change, it's no good any longer you taking a month or a year to make a decision. Because the world is changing so fast around you, you need to be able to identify and analyze a problem at speed, figure out solutions at speed, and then come to a decision at speed. In fact, the speed of decision making is one of the biggest problems that leaders actually now have. So once you've done all of that, then you repeat and iterate all over again. So my key takeaways, and there are 3. When we're having a look at the problems in front of you, break them down into smaller bits. Get diverse perspectives from inside and outside of your organization, but also in your own country, outside of your own country, in your own industry, outside of your own industry, and so on and so forth. Get diverse perspectives, particularly if it is a high-risk decision. And then make sure that you are managing your time effectively and that you are giving yourselves, either as individuals or as teams, time and space to think. Try to find a space where you are not distracted by pets and kids and annoying co-workers. And then once you have done all of that, hopefully now you are a smarter, better decision maker. And remember, do not outsource your decision making, your human brain, to artificial intelligence. And thank you. That's it from me. So, if you like that, let me know in the comments below. And I wish you a bright and successful future. Thank you everyone. Take care. Goodbye.